Well, good afternoon. I'm Frances Wilson. I'm the president and CEO of the Purple Door. Thank you for joining us today. And before we get started, I just wanted to ask if you'll mute yourself. When you're not speaking, we'd appreciate that. And also, this meeting will be recorded. So I just wanted to let you know that as well. So, with the legislative session just around the corner, advocates are working with our partners to determine what changes in law or policy would be a benefit to victims and survivors of domestic violence. And the Purple Door and domestic violence victims and survivors are fortunate to have partners such as the Texas Council on Family Violence, or TCFV. The TCFV policy team has worked many hours to drill down to policies that would have the greatest impact on those affected by domestic violence and ensure that agencies such as the Purple Door can continue to provide essential services. You'll be hearing from Alexandra Cantrell, Krista Del Gallo, and Molly Boyles, members of the policy team, later on in our discussion. Also joining us will be Texas Supreme Court Justice Eva Guzman. Another instrumental partner in this work is Representative Todd Hunter. For years, Representative Hunter has worked with our South Texas delegation to ensure representation for the thousands of victims and survivors that need a voice. When the legislative session is gearing up, I know I will be hearing from him. He always wants to know what the next step is, what is needed to protect our community, and his role in making that happen. Representative Hunter recognizes that he plays a vital role in creating change, and that is why we're here today. Representative Hunter is serving his 10th term in the Texas House of Representatives. He is the state representative for Texas House District 32 in Nueces County, Texas. He's a member of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, which addresses important issues pertaining to criminal law, as well as a member of the State Affairs Committee, which deals with significant matters of state policy, ranging from the administration of the state government to cybersecurity. Please let us now turn our attention to Representative Todd Hunter.
Well, thanks, Frances. Now, I want everybody to know the goal here is domestic violence prevention and education. But I want to brag a little bit about Frances. She didn't really tell you some key points. Not only has she been an advocate for domestic violence prevention, she's been very strong on our support of the Purple Door, but she's the board chair for the Texas Council on Family Violence. She's a member of the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. She's been involved with the Coastal Bend Coordinated Community Response Coalition on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And she is, as we all know her locally, she's a graduate of Leadership Corpus Christi. So, Frances, thank you for everything you've done. And one of the reasons that your legislative delegation and the Coastal Bend has been so active is because of you, your efforts, the Purple Door, and all our coalition partners. So thank you. And to all our listeners and viewers, let me just make a comment. You know, we're the Coastal Bend. Let's be coastal proud. But we've been hit by a Hurricane Harvey. Then we got hit by Hurricane Hannah. Then we got hit by almost hurricane coronavirus COVID-19. Now, those are trauma events, everybody. Those are trauma. When you have this sort of cabin fever, of closing, of darkness, of despair, unfortunately, certain issues rise. Unfortunately, domestic violence. And without many of you involved today, we can't achieve those goals. And we're going to. So the point of this symposium is to shine the light in the darkness. There's nothing wrong with raising the issue. There's nothing wrong with tackling this issue. There's nothing wrong with making strides. And Texas needs to be the leader of the nation in domestic violence prevention and awareness. So today is a positive teleconference. It's a way to exchange ideas. And as you'll hear at the very end, it doesn't stop today. There's going to be a call to action when we go into the legislative session in January. It's time to stand up. It's time to make folks aware, and it's time to come up with the best laws possible. So we've got a great program. We've got some great, great folks, but I want you to know the message is positive, and we're going to make strides. Our legislative delegation, Coastal Bend, has worked well together. As Francis knows, as our Texas Council on Family Violence, we've worked with them. We've made a lot of good strides, and a lot of the laws in Texas have come from our area. And so we're going to continue this program. And I want you to know we have participants who have been affected, men and women, in the domestic violence area, and they're participating today. So I want to thank everybody who's joined, who's listening, who's viewing, who's participating, because this is a very, very important subject, but an important goal. Let me just make a couple of comments. I was very, very proud to be the author of what we call House Bill 1590. And that created a sexual assault survivors task force in the office of the governor. And that's one step. And there's a lot of steps, and we've got a lot of great partners in the legislature. So, bottom line, today's program is to discuss the topic, come up with some ideas. This is going to be a call to action between now and the legislative session. And, I'm so glad to have all of you on. And one of the biggest questions that I get asked, well, how are you going to handle these laws when you get there? Because of COVID-19, who thought we'd be wearing masks? And you'll see a different legislative session. You'll see probably a hybrid, in person and virtual. So it makes it much more important to get our issues prioritized early this time. Let's prioritize them, go into the session, because it's going to be different. But that doesn't mean we can't be successful. So again, legislature coming up. We appreciate everybody here. This is a great resource. And if we can save one person or help one person, we have started the ignition. And that's what our goal is. So I want to thank you all. Now it's my great honor to introduce a very good friend. And she has very, very graciously going to kick off our program today. And let me tell you a little bit about her. I've known her a while, and she never ages. I seem to, but she doesn't. And she has served at 3 levels of the Texas judiciary, the judicial branch. And she began her judicial service in a district court in Harris County. She then went to the 14th Court of Appeals and then to the Texas Supreme Court. And that's extremely honorable, 3 different levels. But I want to highlight some things in her background that I want everybody to know. The justice commitment to legal excellence has been recognized nationally, statewide, and locally. The John Ben Shepherd Public Leadership Institute honored her with the Outstanding Texas Leader Award during the 2015 Texas Leadership Forum. And she was named Appellate Judge of the Year in 2016 by the Texas Association of Civil Trial and Appellate Specialists. But I also want you to know she helped found the Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health and collaborated with a consortium to create resources to better prepare Texas judges for cases involving domestic violence. Since 2013, our Honorable Justice, has also been the Supreme Court of Texas liaison to the Texas Access to Justice Commission. This is an organization dedicated to expanding legal access in civil legal matters for low-income Texans. And before she became a member of the judiciary, she enjoyed a successful 10-year law career in Houston. She holds a BBA from the University of Houston, a JD from the South Texas College of Law, and an LLM from Duke University School of Law. And Justice, what better introduction could a Duke graduate get from a University of Kansas graduate during basketball season about to occur? But everybody, I want to introduce you to our great Supreme Court Justice, Eva Guzman. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative Hunter. Thank you for that way too generous introduction. I'm sorry you all had to tolerate that on this webinar, but I'm so honored to join you today. And I want to thank Representative Hunter for inviting me to share a few thoughts about what we're doing at the Supreme Court of Texas on the issue of domestic violence. The Purple Door community, thank you so much. The work that you do is critically important to the women, to the children, to the men who you serve. Your shelter, your support of individuals affected by domestic violence and sexual assault is paramount to their healing and to their ability to survive and to thrive. So thank you so much for what you're doing. The Texas Council on Family Violence, honored to join you all today. I'll talk a little bit about our work with the council through the Children's Commission. Representative Hunter, as you all know, has long championed many issues, but particularly issues related to domestic violence, to sexual assault. He's done so much in the legislature. He mentioned House Bill 1590, but to have that type of leadership in our state, you're impacting so many lives, Representative Hunter, and it's just an honor to be here. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's a month when we, as Representative Hunter said, we think positively about how to change lives and outcomes, but we also pause to remember the victims of domestic violence, the women, the children, the men sometimes who suffer the horrors of domestic abuse. Yesterday, a police officer in Houston, a 41-year veteran, was gunned down, and he was responding to a domestic violence call. He was going to turn in his retirement documents that day after 41 years. Domestic violence impacts our entire community, victims, their children, first responders, and beyond. So the work that you're doing is life-changing for so many. And I also just want to share another anecdote about how this plays out. We know that domestic violence is willful. We know it's systematic. It intensifies over time. It affects people across communities. But as a young lawyer, I had a neighbor come to me, and her husband had been killed in a car accident. And I was a new lawyer, and she wanted me to help her with the claim and the insurance. And I told her, obviously expressed my condolences. And she says, this week is the first week when I haven't slept in fear. She told me that he had been abusing her their entire marriage. They lived next door to us. We didn't know, had no idea. She said I would hide, and he would begin to throw objects at me when I was hiding under the table to get away from him. And so domestic violence isn't something we always recognize, but it should be something we need to look for. I want to tell you about the work I'm doing on the Children's Commission with that background in mind, because this family had 4 kids. They went on to have good lives, but we had no idea what they were going through in that home. The Supreme Court of Texas Children's Commission has a mission, and that's to improve outcomes for children in the foster care system. But one of the things that is often overlooked is that the children that come into the system come in from homes where there's a lot of abuse, not just neglect, but a lot of abuse. The children are harmed in many ways. Sometimes it's being used as a pawn. Sometimes it's direct abuse. It can be the separation when they're separated from their parents. And so we're fortunate at the Children's Commission to work with many stakeholders, including the Texas Council on Family Violence. And we're partnering with that organization to send out to about 4,000 judges, lawyers, and stakeholders across Texas information about the intersection between domestic violence and the child welfare system, how they interact. And as I was preparing for today's short remarks, I won't take too much of your time. I was speaking with one of the lawyers that works at the Children's Commission, and she mentioned to me her work in a domestic violence center. And she said she worked the 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. shift. And she talked to me about what that was like, that particular shift, and taking those crisis hotline calls and talking to the victims that came in. And her experience inspired her to go to law school and to pursue a career in public service. And she's now helping us with this project that I just mentioned with the Texas Council. Now, the Purple Door, you're a lifeline to victims of domestic violence. As I've said, you stand beside and support those going through their darkest hours. You help victims become survivors. But what can we do for the children that come through your doors? That's what I want to just share a few thoughts with you about. We know that violence can have long-lasting negative effects on children's physical and emotional well-being, as well as their social and academic functioning. So they experience the trauma of domestic violence in the home, but then they enter the foster care system as a result of that violence, and they experience more trauma when they're separated from those parents. So what can we do? I want to offer some ideas on how as judges, as advocates, as attorneys, we can have a positive impact on the safety and the stability of these families. And we have shared goals with service providers like the Purple Door. Keeping the children's safety in mind is first and foremost. Anytime you deal with a child in the child welfare system, there's a service plan, there are court hearings. And when we're thinking about those service plans and those court hearings, let's keep their safety in mind. What is going through this child's mind, having left a very abusive home, entering a strange environment, placed with strangers, and you are that lifeline. You are that support system. So create a service plan that's based on survivors' experiences and strengths. We can encourage a legal and judicial culture where the survivors' experiences are heard, where they're valued, and where they're considered. And I know you have a lot of experience with survivors, but we can learn from them and from their advocates. We can identify the strengths and also what protective factors we can ask ourselves. What are the protective factors that the survivor parent can build on? Safety measures around privacy and confidentiality. We really need to think long and hard about that. What does that look like? What are those concerns? You as advocates can assist in identifying those. Recognizing the potential for ongoing domestic violence during the CPS case, even if the parents are separated. We see this all of the time. A couple of weeks ago in Houston, a young mother was killed at the hands of her husband in front of her children. There had been domestic violence and CPS had come into the home. But the person committing the abuse, they continued to intimidate, to manipulate, to harm a parent, even during the CPS case, using the kids to get information, make sure the kids aren't being used as a pawn, making false reports, calling law enforcement. And this is the abuser using the system to continue to hurt and harm the victim. So let's think about that when we're dealing with children in the child welfare system. But I think as judges and as lawyers, we're in a unique position to identify the violence and to issue court orders that take all of those factors into account. There, you can order participation in a battering, intervention, and prevention program. Individual safety protocols. Don't just utilize whatever list you have there, but really talk to the victim, talk to the children, try to individualize those plans as much as possible. And ask questions. I'll conclude with this. Ask questions about where the children are being placed if they're not with the survivor parent. Ask, why can't the children remain with the survivor parent? What are the plans to ensure that the survivor parent can safely visit their children? How does the temporary caregiver support the relationship between the children and the survivor parent? Does the caregiver support the survivor parent, or are judgments being made about the survivor as well? What's a plan for reunification? There's so much that we can accomplish together. And those are some of the things that I hope we think about when we're dealing with children and survivors. And finally, the resources. You are the eyes and ears of the community. Everyone on this call, you're the eyes and ears. And with COVID, the ability to seek medical help. So sometimes the most common reporters of abuse are medical professionals, educators, law enforcement. Together they make about half of all the reports of abuse and neglect. But during the COVID-19 emergency and all of the stay-at-home orders, there's far fewer eyes and ears on hand to help identify potential abuse and protect survivors. And so one of the best tools that we have is information. As a community, we need to work together to ensure that parents have information about statewide community resources. Representative Hunter mentioned the Access to Justice Foundation. We have a sexual assault and survivors hotline that's online. The Texas Supreme Court in May of 2020 reissued the protective order kit. It's online, it's free. The form, the questions, the protocols, make sure that you know where to access that. Let's continue to work on communicating in languages that our people can relate to. There are many times when language is a barrier. So let's try to continue to make sure that our websites are as multilingual as possible. I think in closing, this month in particular, Domestic Violence Month, there's never been another time, I don't think, even during other disasters in our country and in Texas in particular, when it's carried more meaning or more weight than it does this October. Calls to domestic violence hotlines have increased exponentially. Reports of domestic violence, whether they are anecdotal or statistical, are way up. Every Texan, everyone on this call has a role in ensuring we support victims of domestic violence and that we work to prevent that violence. And I know Texans will embrace these challenges. And I thank you again, Representative Hunter, for your leadership, the Purple Door, every single one of our community stakeholders, the Texas Council on Family Violence. Together, we can be that first line of defense for our neighbors for my neighbor, that woman that I mentioned that I knew so many decades ago. We are that first line of defense. Thank you very much for the honor of joining you today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Justice. We appreciate you, and thank you very much for your comments. Appreciate you. Now, at this time, we're going to transition the meeting, and I do want to note, of course, Fran Wilson with the Purple Door is here. We also have Molly Boyles, Public Policy Manager with the Texas Council of Family Violence, Krista DeGallo, Public Policy Manager from the Texas Council of Family Violence, Alexandra Cantrell, Public Policy Manager from the Texas Council on Family Violence. So we have a great group. And before I turn over the baton, I do want to say one thing. Not only do we have a social and domestic issue, but there's another impact of domestic violence that needs to be erased. And that's the impact on the economy, workforce, and business. A lot of times it can actually impact the economy. And so we have kind of two areas, economic as well as the domestic social side. So it's a very, very important issue across the board. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Fran. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Hunter. I don't want to take much time from the policy team because I know they have a lot of interesting proposed legislation they'd like to share. I just wanted to mention that COVID-19 has had a huge impact on many of the agencies across the state. Many have seen an increase in services. We have actually locally seen a decrease, but I was looking into those numbers and I realized we're seeing fewer children. So it's really interesting that Judge Guzman brought up children. Primarily that is because we would see kids many times while they were at school. We have so many people that do not have access to transportation, so it was quite convenient for their children to be seen by a counselor while they're in school. And so when school stopped, that stopped. And then of course we have the summer months, and now we're in, some people are still doing remote learning, some people are in school, but there's not room for that counseling session anymore. So we're working on a way that we can remedy that to reach children. But in the recent weeks, the last 2 weeks in particular, we have seen our numbers go up. We have seen many more people trying to get into shelter. And that's a very tricky, a very, I guess, fine line to walk, because we're trying to figure out how do we serve a number of people in a shelter that was not meant to house people during a pandemic, because nobody thought about something like that. So we're trying to house people that need us while trying to keep everybody safe and healthy. And so it's been a very interesting adventure these last few months. And we see, as COVID-19 hopefully becomes more manageable in the coming months, we do anticipate that our numbers are going to continue to rise, and we're going to see more and more people reaching out for help. One thing that I'm particularly interested in, I'm interested in all the legislation that the policy team will be discussing, but budget cuts, I'm sure y'all have heard, that's on the table. That's a concern for us because our work is people. We invest in people to provide a service. And so if we get cuts, that is just a domino effect. It automatically means that you have fewer people to provide fewer services to fewer victims and survivors. So ultimate people that will lose in that situation are the victims and survivors of the state of Texas. So that's my little plug for budget cuts. I really hope that we're able to avoid that, or find a clever way to mitigate those issues. So that's really what I wanted to share. I want to be able to turn it over to, I think, Molly. Molly, you're first, right? Okay. I'll just turn it over to you then.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hopefully I'm coming through. It is such a privilege to be here with y'all today. So thank you to the representative, to Francis, to the judge, and to Angie, who I know does so much to make it all work to get us here. As Francis mentioned, the representative mentioned, my name is Molly Boyles. I'm a public policy manager at the Texas Council on Family Violence, where I've been over a decade getting to work on policy as it pertains to survivors. And just a quick minute, because we know some of you are very familiar with us, and that makes us get so excited. But for anyone who's not, our role is to be the state coalition to stand with and behind family violence programs and survivors as they take on efforts to support your community, much like y'all are doing here, and have done for many years. It's been a privilege to have the relationship we do have, and the leadership your community shows. Really, every session has been impressive, and I think it shows other folks how to do it. So thank you for being a leader. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about appropriations. So Francis did a great job kind of outlining how important it is. But for us, when we think about legislative measures and we sit down and think about our agenda, our top issue every time is appropriations. For us, if, as Francis said, if staff are not there to provide services and support to survivors, and survivors do not have a place to go, then all of the great work we're doing, there's just such a huge hole. So if the judge does all the amazing work, but there's nowhere for someone to go when we've raised the issue, we've got a huge problem in our state. So that said, we do know it's a tough session. You know, much like the representative said, we all are here today seeing what's going on around the pandemic. We're aware as a state what's in front of us. But for the Texas Council on Family Violence, we also know we've had a capacity crisis for 10 years. So as we sat, maybe if we had sat here 10 years ago, I would have told you that 1 out of every 5 survivors who called a domestic violence program were turned away just because there was no space. It's now 1 out of every 2. So 48% of everyone who calls solely because we just don't have the space. And if we think about the neighbor the judge spoke about, the courage it would have taken to pick up that phone and make that call and have someone tell you no. And solely because we don't have enough space, or for the advocates like Francis or Kelly who have to say no to someone they don't know what will happen. It means appropriations is more critical now than it ever has been, even in a tough session. And so for us, we're certainly asking for level funding. You know, level funding for us is $63,500,000, and that keeps lights on. It keeps the team at the Purple Door going, answering phone calls. What it doesn't do yet is address the capacity crisis, right? And so for us, we're also asking for an additional $13 million to begin the road. And we know what a hard ask this is, but we think of ourselves as standing with and raising voice for those who cannot. And so that means we need to be able to stand up when we see these issues at hand. It also means for many survivors, when they come into a program, what's next, right? A shelter is an amazing safety stopgap, but it is not your end home. And so we need to think about the legal issues the judge so adequately put forward. We need to think about the housing issues, the economic issues representative mentioned. We need to think about that a survivor needs childcare. And how do we get those things for survivors so that they can get a new home? They can go back to the workforce or maintain their job. And then really in the core fear for a lot of us prior to the pandemic and during is when we say no, what we know is in our states, some survivors do face a life or death situation. In the past year, 150 women were murdered by their male intimate partner. 31 men were murdered. And so we know that it is critical that not only are we there for all of the safety reasons, but we're there because for survivors, the violence sometimes turns lethal. We also know 75% of these occurred in the home. And so that means getting out of the home when you've identified, and again, I love the judge's word that the survivor has identified, that that's what's helpful and that's what's safe, that we're there and ready to provide that support. So for us, appropriations certainly has the level funding, and that's our kind of top bill, top priority, but it's also the $13 million in exceptional item funds. For us, we think of it as that, of course, that's our main appropriations priorities, but we have two other appropriation priorities that we'll talk about just for a moment. Many survivors, what they say they want from us is for the violence to stop, for the violence to change. And one of the ways in which we do that is through batterer intervention and prevention programs, or BIPs. And so these are programs that are multi-week courses to really examine power and control in a relationship, to really speak with the partner who uses violence about that, and to ask them to take accountability for that in their home. And as survivors choose to stay in the home, it's important that we also invest in that system. And so we are asking for support for a $3.5 million rider to TDCJ, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And then our last appropriations request is that we know there are times where we have already seen a higher lethality. Some of the things you all have fabulously stood with us on before, like strangulation training for law enforcement. We know if there is a gun in the home, or there's a knife in the home, or any other weapon, we know there's enhanced lethality. We know that for many survivors, when they are pregnant, there may be higher lethality. And so when we see these markers present, that we have a team surrounding a survivor via a domestic violence high-risk team who is ready in a coordinated response with our law enforcement partners, with our partners at the Purple Door, with our partners in prosecution and the judiciary, who are ready to stand with a survivor. And for that, we asked for a rider to the Office of the Attorney General for $600,000. It's a small investment and a huge amount of safety. So when we approach our legislative session, that's usually our top priority. And one of the ways y'all can stand with us in this top priority, because I mean, you already did because you hosted this symposium, but as I think I really like the representatives' words for us to stay in action mode, is that we do have on our website what we call a purple postcard that you can sign and say, I stand with them. I stand with them in believing this matters for survivors. And it's a really simple URL. It's tcfe.org/postcard. But that's one action item, and we can talk about it more later. But that's our appropriations strategy. And then I'm going to actually ask Krista Delgado to chime in on one of our other legislative measures as well. Krista?
Thank you so much, Molly. And again, thank you so much to Representative Hunter and Angie and the Coastal Bend community, to Fran and the Purple Door, and to Justice Guzman for your brilliant remarks. And just, we were sort of slacking with our colleagues that work more closely on child welfare issues about how impressed we are with just your breadth of knowledge and expertise and your openness to really promoting awareness around the impacts of domestic violence on children within the judiciary. So thank you so much. The first substantive priority that I'm going to talk about is around the conditions of bond when there's been someone charged with an offense involving family violence. So this would amend Chapter 17 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. It's the chapter in the Code of Criminal Procedure around bail. And we find this section on conditions of bond in family violence offenses at the end of this chapter. And it provides for magistrates to construct a bond that actually really does address both victim and child safety and accountability. And we are very grateful for this section of the code, as well as the earlier section in the Code of Criminal Procedure around magistrates' orders of emergency protection. However, the one difference between these two sections of the code that are really pointed towards the same type of behavior is that while the magistrate's orders of emergency protection are required to be entered into the Texas Crime Information Center, or TCIC, so that law enforcement is made aware of these magistrates' orders and can make arrests upon violations that they see. And for magistrates' orders, the victim recipient of the magistrates' orders are required to be notified. even though a condition of bond in the later section of Chapter 17 might do the same things, might say, okay, I'm going to release you, but you cannot communicate with the victim. You cannot go to the children's daycare, et cetera, et cetera. And those conditions of bond, the violations have the same exact weight in terms of the penal code as magistrate's orders of emergency protection and protection orders under the family code. However, they are not currently entered into the TCIC. So what that means is that law enforcement is not made aware of these. So when they're dispatched out to a call and they run someone's name, there is not a way for them to search in that database and find that this person is in violation of that condition of bond. We had a survivor speak on this very issue last session, and she knew that those conditions of bond existed and that he was in violation of the conditions of bond by being outside of her house and threatening her. And the police came out and couldn't find anything. And actually, she had also been awarded a magistrate's order of emergency protection that had since expired, but the conditions of bond don't expire until the case is resolved. And the cops said, we can't do anything. You know, that magistrate's order is already expired, so we have nothing. And so so the cops actually left. She fled for her safety, and that abuser entered her home and then attempted to burn her home down. And so she took off with her children to find safety while he was proceeding to violate the conditions of bond. And it wasn't until the next day, once the law enforcement had talked with the prosecutors and been able to be at the station and look at the court orders and see that those existed, that they could indeed make an arrest, that was a violation that they witnessed. And so we want to make sure that law enforcement have those tools for both victim safety, public safety, and for law enforcement's own safety, that they're aware that those conditions exist. We also want to make sure that the victims are aware, because currently for conditions of bond, victims are not required to be notified. So we want to make sure that victims and law enforcement have the awareness so that these are actual meaningful tools that magistrates are implementing for safety as they are intended to be. And this is something that we did offer up as a legislative priority last session. It was Senate Bill 1804. It made it all the way through the process and had a very chaotic and interesting death that involved a non-germane amendment being added to it at the very end. And so we are again coming to the legislature saying, you prioritized this last time, you passed it unanimously through both chambers. Let's do it cleanly this time and make sure that victims, law enforcement, communities can be safer. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alexandra Cantrell, to talk about our other legislative priority.
Right, thanks, Krista. Yes, so another priority that we have for the upcoming legislative session relates specifically to domestic violence homicide reduction. So every year, the Texas Council on Family Violence publishes a report called Honoring Texas Victims. Those narratives and fact sheets for the 2019 Honoring Texas Victims, as well as past reports, can be found on our website at tcfe.org. But within this report, the women who've been killed by a male intimate partner during the previous year are recognized and their stories are shared. Over the past 2 years, Texas Council on Family Violence has expanded the report to include men killed by their female intimate partner, as well as same-sex partner homicides. The recent numbers, and Molly had mentioned this previously while she was talking about appropriations and just the importance of funding our family violence programs, show that the 185 intimate partner homicides occurred in 62 Texas counties last year, including 5 in Nueces County. Texas Council on Family Violence also does analysis on the homicide trends throughout the state that includes the method of homicide. The most common means include death by firearm, stabbing, or strangulation, and those account for over 80% of the intimate partner homicides in Texas in 2019. So while the additional analysis is done to determine known risk factors within the Honoring Texas Victims report, we believe that the state would benefit from a more in-depth analysis of the intersection of domestic violence and the means of homicide. So this upcoming legislative session, we're looking to mandate the creation of a task force that would conduct this analysis, as well as make recommendations on future legislation, policies, procedures that are based on the data that they collect and the work completed that would provide some more tangible ways for Texas to move forward in reducing domestic violence homicide in a meaningful way. So this work is particularly important based on the apparent spike that we believe to be seeing in domestic violence homicides that have occurred during the pandemic. This task force would receive input from a variety of individuals and organizations concerning the topics that are identified in the bill and publish a report to be shared with the appropriate legislative body to have available for future consideration of future legislation. We know that different methods of homicide hold different and varying risks, but our hope is to learn more on how those risks can be addressed and neutralized in Texas to help further support survivors across the state. I think that does complete our legislative overview. But once again, I just wanted to thank Representative Hunter for his work supporting domestic violence survivors across the state, as well as creating this forum. I also wanted to thank Justice Guzman for your continued work on this issue and your work with us throughout the years. I wanted to thank everyone here for allowing us to share. And I also wanted to make one additional plug for the call to action. Like Molly had mentioned, we really encourage you all to visit our website and sign the purple postcard indicating that you support full funding for family violence survivors. And if you want to share them with your community partners, we would love that as well. Once again, that website is tcfb.org/postcard. So it's POSTCRAD. And with that, I believe that I will turn it back over to Representative Hunter. Thank you all again.
Thanks a lot, Alexander, and appreciate Molly and Krista and Fran, and of course, Justice Guzman. And I want to, today, the Purple Door and the Texas Council on Family Violence, being host means a lot. First of all, I support full funding. I think you need to get more than full funding. How about that? So, in this day and age, this is an issue that's a front burner issue. And it really affects all lives, and it affects men and women. And it affects the economy. And it's a big impact. But I do want to thank you all. Let me kind of tell everybody as we end. This is a call to action to get support, not only for the full funding, but also to show strength at the Capitol. You heard an example how somebody can put something on a bill and it delays or breaks it down. What we want to do is show full force and strength at the Texas Capitol. It's going to be a different time. As I said at the top, the legislature may be kind of a hybrid, a little bit of virtual, a little bit of in person. We really don't know how we're proceeding until January. By Constitution, we don't go to the legislature till the second Tuesday of January for 140 days. And during that time period, we need to take up issues like domestic violence prevention. And we need to organize and do this early. So locally, with Fran's help, and of course, our state organization and all of you, Angie from my office is going to be keeping the issue alive. We're going to be working with the legislative delegation here to come up with our support, not only on the funding, but on other issues in the Texas statutes so that we can be the model state for the rest of the nation. So we'll be doing our call to action, organizing mid-November till the end of the year. And so any of you have any ideas, any of you that have any thoughts, please get them to us. As I always say, the best laws come from you, and especially those that are participating here today. So again, Fran, thank you so much. You and the Purple Door. Justice, it's so good to see you. Thanks for all the work you do in this state and what you do to help others. And, you know, our Texas Family Council Violence Group, you've all done great. You keep in there. We're going to get that funding. We're going to push it. And we're going to do everything to make this issue become something that we can handle, be proud of, and resolve. So, Angie, thank you again for being the glue for the program. And everybody, we are ending on time. But again, call to action. Have any ideas, you let us know. Thanks to everybody. Appreciate it. And everybody have a safe and healthy time. Thank you.